ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
Other than Erin Patterson, Ian Wilkinson is the only survivor of that beef Wellington lunch. Today, he took the stand. I'm the ABC's court reporter, Kristian Silva.
And I'm Stephen Stockwell. It is May 6 and we have just finished the 5th day of Erin Patterson's murder trial. Welcome to Mushroom Case Daily.
The prosecution argues she had travelled to nearby Loch and Outram, where there'd been sightings of death cap mushrooms.
She told doctors she fed her children leftovers but scraped the mushrooms off.
Police allege Ms Patterson refused medical treatment for both herself and her children.
Ms Patterson admits she lied to police about foraging for mushrooms and getting rid of the dehydrator.
So, Kristian, we've now settled into the rhythm of the second week of Erin Patterson's trial now. Before we get too deep into what happened, can you hit us with the headlines of what unfolded in court today?
Ian Wilkinson, the sole surviving guest of the lunch, took to the witness stand, and he really was the key witness of the day. He took the court through how this lunch came about, some of the conversations that happened at the lunch table, and also what happened in the aftermath. We also heard from a paramedic, a nurse and a doctor who were called to the stand. They discussed some of the treatment that was administered to the lunch guests after they fell sick. And we also got some additional information about the dehydrator at the centre of this lunch from the guy that managed the store where the dehydrator was sold.
It was a really interesting day of evidence in Erin Patterson's trial. Most notably was Ian Wilkinson, who was giving evidence today. And I was watching in the media overflow room for a period of time, and the thing that stuck with me and that I hadn't realised was happening actually was that every witness who was giving evidence as they're walking up is asked if they want to give an affirmation or an oath. And Ian Wilkinson is a pastor at the Korumburra Baptist Church. And so he, in this moment, confidently says, "I will swear an oath to the Almighty God." And it really brought home who he was in this situation, his relationship to this whole thing. And, you know, he then went on to talk about how him and his wife Heather were invited to the lunch at church a couple of weeks prior to it. And actually that Heather, his wife, was really quite excited to go to this lunch, right, Kristian?
That's right. He was saying that they were very happy to be invited. And he said this in the context that they did know Erin through their family relationship and talked to her plenty of times, but he described her as a bit of an acquaintance. So he seemed excited that maybe their relationship was going to go to the next level. So they were really looking forward to this lunch at Erin Patterson's house.
Yeah, it was really interesting hearing Ian talk about, you know, where his wife Heather heard this news, you know, where Erin told her it was in a different part of the church to where Ian was, and then how she'd walked through the church to tell Ian. And, you know, his memory of that was quite clear, you know, talking about how excited Heather was and, you know, sharing the news. It was interesting sort of, seeing how he told that story. And
as part of the trial, various exhibits are shown to the court, and we actually saw Heather's green, colourful diary. And it had marked in there lunch at Erin's on the specific day, and even the time when they were being picked up, and a reference to the fruit platter that she was bringing for dessert. Yeah, it was interesting. Yeah, this diary, very similar to one that my parents keep actually, which is quite cute. And yeah, there's 12 p.m. and Ian's explaining that that's when Erin's parents-in-law, so Erin's mother and father-in-law, Gail and Dom Patterson, would be coming to their house to pick them up. Yeah, fruit written in there in a different coloured pen, I noticed, as a reference to the fruit platter they were taking. And so, yeah, obviously on this day that Gail and Don have come to their house, they've picked them up and they've gone around and, walked into Erin's house, and it was really interesting. They'd never been to this house before. And the thing that was really interesting was Ian telling this story about how his wife Heather was enamoured with the pantry in this house. Yeah, Ian said that his wife was really keen to check out the pantry in Erin Patterson's house because she was organising a new pantry for her own property or something to that effect. And so Heather is calling out to Gail saying, "Come and check out the pantry." This is the story that Ian says. And Ian says that he noticed that Erin Patterson was looking very reluctant about these two women trying to snoop around her pantry and have a little look. So noticing that, Ian said that he kind of backed off and didn't want to go and look, thinking maybe the pantry's a bit of a mess. He won't add to any potential embarrassment. But that was an interesting point that he brought up. And then from there, he moved to the fact that they had some small talk before gathering around the kitchen island bench where food was being prepared.
Yeah, and this was a really big part of the kind of conversation today was the plates. Who was serving whom, what was on the menu, all that, because we previously heard that there were 2 different coloured plates. There were 4 grey plates that were served to the guests, and then Erin had her own plate, which was a different colour, like an orangey, browny, rusty colour, I think Ian described it as today. What did we hear about how the food was distributed?
Ian said that both Heather and Gail were offering to help plate up the food and that Erin Patterson rejected that offer and plated it up herself. So he said that each person received a individually cased beef Wellington, and he also used the word pasty to describe that. And he said there was also some green beans and mashed potatoes on each person's plate. He said that each of the guests received a stone grey coloured plate, whereas Erin ate off an orange coloured plate. Now, later on in cross-examination, Colin Mandy, the defence barrister, took Ian back to this and was saying, are you sure? Are you sure that the plates all matched from that the guests had? And he was insistent, definitely. We all had the 4 grey plates and Erin had the orange plate.
So was Colin Mandy trying to ask whether or not, the grey plates might have been different types of plates in their own mix?
Exactly. And he was also trying to assess Ian Wilkinson's memory of that. And Ian was very clear that the 4 had grey plates, Erin had the orange.
And there was also a discussion around who was taking food to the table and who was feeding who, like basically who gave whoever the plate. Obviously very relevant in this situation.
Yeah, it was the orange plate was Erin's, and Mr. Wilkinson said the group sat down at the table, they said grace, and then they started tucking into their meals. And he actually had some really vivid memories of how much each person ate, which is kind of unusual, but he explained the reason for that. And that was because there was a bit of banter at the table. So he said that he and his wife ate their entire serving, while Don ate his serving and half of his wife's because she couldn't finish it. And there was just a little bit of banter about how much each person had been eating. But he said that banter didn't really extend to what Erin was eating, but he did notice that she was consuming what was on her plate. He then said that they were pretty full after eating this meal. So they had a dessert of a cake and a fruit platter. That wasn't fully consumed, but then things turned to a really serious topic, which was this bombshell that Erin Patterson dropped to the lunch guests where, according to Ian Wilkinson, she claimed she had been diagnosed with cancer. And Mr. Wilkinson said in that moment, that's when it really clicked in his mind that this was the reason they'd been invited to lunch. His memory was that it was some kind of ovarian or cervical cancer that Erin said she'd been diagnosed with. And he said that she sought advice from the other guests about how to break the news of this cancer to their children. And he said that Don Patterson advised Erin that the best approach was to be honest. Now, this topic about the cancer was again addressed by Colin Mandy, the defence barrister, and he was saying to Ian, are you sure she definitively stated that she had cancer, or was it a suspected cancer diagnosis? And Ian very clearly said it wasn't an impression. She plainly said she had some sort of cancer. Erin was fairly clear the diagnosis was given. And Mr. Wilkinson said Erin had spoken about a diagnostic test that showed a spot on the scan that was a tumour. We did hear earlier in this trial that Erin Patterson's lawyers concede the cancer claim was false.
Yeah. Ian, as he was talking about the lunch, and as he was at this lunch, I should say, noticed that Erin Patterson's son was arriving home. This was as they were talking about how to break the news to the children. Obviously, he doesn't want Erin's son hearing this news. he gathers everyone around. They do a quick prayer, praying that Erin can have wisdom as she lets the children in on this news. And then Erin's son comes in the room with a friend, and they kind of very quickly change the subject. And I think it sounded like the lunch dispersed quite quickly after that.
It sounded like they moved on to another topic. The Wilkinsons had another appointment at 3:00 that afternoon, so they had to head off, and everything seemed fine. But it was much later that night when Ian said both he and his wife started feeling sick, and they were experiencing diarrhea and vomiting, and the following morning they went to the Leongatha Hospital on the insistence of Simon Patterson. This is Erin's estranged husband who didn't turn up to the lunch, and Simon was also well aware that his own parents, Don and Gail, were also quite sick, suffering from similar symptoms as well.
One of the things I found really interesting in Simon Patterson's evidence was when he was talking about how Heather Wilkinson kept asking about the different coloured plates. Is it strange that she has these different colour plates, all of that? Was that something that came up today? Did Ian mention that at all? Does he remember?
Yeah, he did remember it, and it was along the lines of his wife also making comments that there were different coloured plates used by the lunch guests as opposed to the orange coloured plate that Erin had.
Yeah. Does Ian remember much about what happened in hospital? Could he tell much of the story of what happened there, or is that where his story ends up fading slightly?
It sounded like he could remember his first few days in hospital, and the group were moved between various hospitals. However, his memory did become a bit hazy later on. I mean, he was intubated and he was treated for several weeks at Melbourne's Austin Hospital and was allowed to return home in late September. So this is, nearly 2 months after the lunch that he was able to finally return home and return to some kind of normal life.
Well, we don't have his experience of that period. We did hear from some of the medical professionals that were treating him today, didn't we?
We started getting into some of the early testing that happened. We heard from paramedics who explained, these people that we took to hospital were sick with diarrhea and vomiting. And Dr. Beth Morgan, a doctor at the Dandenong Hospital, was called to the stand. So this is like the second or third hospital that this group has been to, and she's talking about their treatment a couple of days after the lunch, and she described all sorts of various tests that they undertook. The upshot was the results were abnormal, and she was quite concerned that there was evidence of liver damage setting in. And as their conditions worsened, a diagnosis of death cap mushrooms was becoming clearer. And as we got to the end of Dr. Morgan's evidence today, she said that plans were put in place to move these guests to the Austin Hospital in Melbourne. Dr. Morgan also said that she became aware of Erin Patterson, who wasn't in her hospital at that point, and she said that she gave some advice that Erin should also be taken to the Austin Hospital, and that was the end of the evidence for the day.
Yeah. Ian's partner, Heather, or Ian's wife, I should say, Heather, died while he would have been in hospital, probably unconscious. Was there any reflection or any questioning about that at all today?
There was no questions about the emotional toll that this had taken, and there was no questions sort of asking Ian to reflect on everything. So he wasn't really given an opportunity to talk about how he felt. But Ian did show some signs of emotion today, and even in some of the earlier questions where he was introducing himself and asked to talk about who his wife was and how many kids they had and that sort of thing, he smiled and chuckled when he referred to his wife as the baby of the family because she had 2 older sisters. And Mr. Wilkinson did show some warmth and some good humour at various times.
There were some quite funny moments in court today, which just really surprised me. I wasn't expecting it. I was expecting today to be such a heavy emotional day, given what Ian Wilkinson had been through. But there was quite a bit of laughter, quite a lot of smiling. One of the things that kept happening was that the chair that he was sitting on kept like dipping down, slowly going down, like one of those gas lift chairs. And so when that happened, he was like, "Oh, look, it's just happened again. Sorry." He'd apologise quite profusely. Someone would come and lift it back up. And there was a moment where Justice Beale, who was the judge presiding over these proceedings, made a joke. It's like, "Oh, we do this to all the witnesses," and a laugh echoes around the courtroom. It was really quite sweet.
It was nice to see some lighter moments, and when that happened, even Erin Patterson herself did have a wry smile on her face. Erin, throughout this trial, has been pretty neutral with her expressions. She again was in the dock listening to proceedings as things unfold. But yes, even she could see the lighter side of that moment.
We did have another couple of witnesses appearing today. We spoke through some of the medical professionals who were there, but also the man who managed the homeware store that Erin bought the Dehydrator from. That seemed really straightforward, almost like a matter of course. But was there anything interesting that you took away from that?
He was in and out in about 5 minutes. His name was Darren Fox, and I dare say, as the owner and manager of Hartley Wells Better Home Living in Leongatha, he never thought he'd be called to give evidence in a triple murder trial, but you never know. He said that in November 2023, so this is 4 months after the lunch took place, one of his employees came to him saying that she believed she'd sold an item to Erin Patterson. So they looked up the invoice and they actually found the Dehydrator that was used in the lunch and inevitably ended up at the tip. So he said they did a little investigation. They found the tax invoice and the Sunbeam Dehydrator was listed. It cost $229 and it was bought on the 28th of April, almost 3 months to the day of the lunch.
And that's actually a really interesting point because we are getting a lot of questions into Mushroom Case Daily. mushroomcasedaily@abc.net.au is our email address. Please get in touch. The email address is currently managing the volume of emails despite it increasing exponentially.
We can handle it.
We can absolutely handle it. We've got a team of people working on this. Earlier in the episode, I mentioned Erin Patterson's son, and we have had a lot of questions about her children emailed to us. Karen, Rowena, Catherine, Prue, a few other people are really interested in whether or not Erin Patterson's children will be giving evidence.
Stocky, in nearly all cases during this trial, the jury hasn't been given much notice. So far, they've not heard who's coming up until they pop up in the witness box. At the very beginning of the trial, a list of civilian witness names were read out, and the two kids were on that list, but whether they actually take the stand is another matter.
Yep. And also, speaking of witnesses, we have a question here from Sean. He listened to yesterday's episode and he was really interested in, we basically just had some feedback for us saying it'd be really useful for any witnesses if we could say whether or not they're being called by the prosecution or the defence team and why they're being asked to give witness evidence.
Fair question. At this point, all of the witnesses being called are prosecution witnesses. There will be a chance later in the trial for the defence to call their own. But Colin Mandy, the defence barrister, has the opportunity to cross-examine anyone the prosecution brings up, so he can fire some questions into them, no problem.
Yep. Sean was also asking about cross-examination too. He was saying it'd be really helpful if we kind of detailed, some more of that cross-examination stuff. Sean, I will say, certainly in regards to yesterday's episode, when we're talking about the evidence people are given, often we're including things they've said under cross-examination as well. It is really hard for us to give just an absolute blow-by-blow because so much happens in the day in court, right, Kristian?
Court sits for about 6 hours every day, and we try to make podcast episodes that are digestible, so please forgive us for that. We just try to summarise it as best as we can.
Yeah. Thank you so much to all of you that are sending in questions. We're really enjoying answering them. Some of the investigative work some of you are doing is actually really impressive. And we obviously can't get into that now, but thank you for sending it to us. If you have any work that you're doing or if you have any questions for us, please send it to mushroomcasedaily@abc.net.au. And also, if you're enjoying this podcast, please leave us a review, rate us on whatever you are listening to this on. It is really helpful for us. And of course, make sure you have the ABC Listen app so you don't miss an episode of Mushroom Case Daily.
We'll be back tomorrow. We're expecting more witnesses on the stand. Mushroom Case Daily is produced by ABC Audio Studios and ABC News. It's presented by me, Kristian Silva, the ABC's court reporter, and producer Stephen Stockwell.
Our executive producer is Claire Rawlinson, props to Kristian's boss, Sarah Jench, Audio Studios manager, Eric George, and our true crime colleagues, Tim Roxburgh, Rachel Brown and Yasmin Parry, for helping make this show a reality. This episode was produced on the land of the Gunai-Kurnai people.
You've been listening to an ABC podcast. Discover more great ABC podcasts, live radio and exclusives on the ABC Listen app.